despite the fact that the criminal statute said they shall be imprisoned. You made a political decision, Merrick Garland made a political decision, that because you agree with the protesters, you don't like the decision the Supreme Court justices made, the marshals were instructed, don't arrest anyone and don't enforce federal law. Isn't that correct?
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Monaco, welcome.
Thank you.
You have a very important job. You're the number 2 person in the Department of Justice. Every U.S. attorney reports to you. The U.S. Marshals report to you. You are responsible for day-to-day operations of the Department of Justice, and in particular, the criminal justice aspects of the Department of Justice. Is all of that correct?
That's correct.
It is unfortunate, Ms. Monaco, that as you look back over the last 2.5 years, this Department of Justice, I believe, has been the most partisan Department of Justice we've ever seen. And that is directly contrary to the mission of DOJ. DOJ is meant to be nonpartisan. It is meant to enforce the law, regardless of party. I had hopes that Merrick Garland would actually do that when he was confirmed. Those hopes have been shattered. You have been a loyal deputy standing alongside that partisan corruption of Department of Justice. You have been willing to devote massive resources to targeting individuals that are perceived to be political opponents of the White House. And you have been willing to devote 0 resources to protecting individuals who are perceived to be political opponents of the White House. I want to ask you about a statute you've been asked about already, 18 U.S.C. 1507. You're familiar with this statute?
Yes.
It's a criminal statute that says whoever with the intent of influencing any judge pickets or parades in or near a building or residences occupied or used by such judge shall be fined or imprisoned under this title or imprisoned not more than 1 year or both. Now, the entire country has seen hundreds of protesters outside the homes of Supreme Court justices night after night after night. You turn on your TV and you see violations of this criminal statute over and over and over again. How many prosecutions has DOJ brought under 18 U.S.C. Section 1507 under your leadership?
There have been no prosecutions under 1507. We're pursuing an attempted murder case against an individual who
0
threatened
is the answer.
Justice Kavanaugh.
I'm quite aware, and you're responsible for that, allowing these protests night after night after night. The violent threat of homicide of the individual who traveled across the country attempting to murder a Supreme Court justice, that was fueled by DOJ refusing to enforce this statute. Now, it's not an accident that DOJ refused to enforce this statute. The U.S. Marshals gave a presentation. The General Counsel's Office of the U.S. Marshals, if you look at one of the pages from that presentation, the General Counsel's Office stated the goals of the Residential and Personal Protection Mission: keep SCOTUS justices and their family free from physical harm, do not interfere with lawful First Amendment protected activity, avoid, unless absolutely necessary, criminal enforcement actions involving the protesters, particularly on public space, and making arrests and initiating prosecutions is not the goal of the Marshals' presence at SCOTUS residences. Are you familiar with this presentation?
I am. I'm familiar with the fact that the U.S. Marshal Service Director has been explicit, has been clear that the Attorney General has repeatedly directed him to enforce all federal laws, including 1507, and that his #1 priority, and that of his many deputies assigned to a 24/7 security presence, is to protect the life, the safety, the property of the justices and
Did you
their
or anyone
family.
from the DAG's office meet with the U.S. Marshal Service and discuss Section 1507?
I regularly meet with the Director of the Marshal Service, the Attorney
and have you
General.
discussed 1507?
I discussed the Attorney General has been quite clear, and I have been quite clear with the Director of the Marshal Service.
Are you familiar with this presentation?
I've seen those slides, if they're the ones that Senator Britt presented to the Attorney General. But I want to be quite clear, Senator, about the direction given to the Marshal Service through the Director of the Marshal Service. He has been clear that the Attorney General directed him repeatedly to enforce all federal laws, to make his number one priority.
That is demonstrably false, because this is written instruction. Making arrests and initiating prosecution is not the goal. That's not an instruction to enforce the law. That is exactly the opposite. It is 180 degrees. It is instructing them. It is not the goal to arrest anybody, despite the fact that the criminal statute said they shall be imprisoned. You made a political decision, Merrick Garland made a political decision, that because you agree with the protesters, you don't like the decision the Supreme Court justices made, the marshals were instructed, don't arrest anyone and don't enforce federal law. Isn't that correct?
That is not correct, because the Attorney General and I and the Marshal Service Director are so concerned about potential threats to the justices. The Attorney General directed in an unprecedented step, 24/7.
Not what this says in writing.
24/7.
What does this say in writing?
I don't have the right glasses on for that, but Senator, the Attorney General was very clear with the Director of the Marshal Service, and the Marshal Service Director has said the same thing.
The word not is even underlined.
The number one priority given to the Marshal Service for their unprecedented protection detail for the Supreme Court justices is to protect their life, their safety,
to ignore
and their
1507.
To protect their life, their safety.
To ignore federal criminal law.
Respectfully disagree with that characterization.
That's what the written instruction says. Not is underlined. Do not make arrests. Do not initiate prosecutions. Up is not down.
The Director of the Marshal Service has been very clear. The Attorney General directed him to enforce all federal laws, but that his number one priority is to ensure the safety
Ms. Monaco,
and the
what you're
protection.
saying is objectively false.
Time of the senator has expired. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here with us today. I want to talk with you just a little bit. Just looking at Vladimir Putin, Ukraine, what is going on there, I think we all know that he is a thug and a war criminal. And you look at the atrocities that have been committed in Ukraine, and we also know that you've got other bad actors, China, North Korea, Iran, that are watching very closely. And when you see this, when you see the genocide that China's carrying out against the Uyghurs, what they've done to the Hong Kong freedom fighters in brutalizing them, their history and continued brutalization of the Mongolians and the Tibetans, and now you look at the bullying they're doing to Taiwan and to the island nations and the Philippines. And then what I would like to know is what your coordination is, what you're doing in conjunction with other agencies that are focused on these human rights abuses.
Well, Senator, I quite agree with you that China and Iran and other states, as I said to Senator Graham, I think are watching what Putin is doing in Ukraine, and that's why, of course, there must be accountability. When it comes to China and other states who are projecting power and perpetrating human rights abuses, as you laid out, we are using our authorities to hold them to account, whether it's malicious cyber actors, whether it's, and I would point to a case that we just announced earlier this week, where we've indicted dozens of Chinese nationals for brazenly perpetrating a campaign of intimidation by setting up police stations in downtown Manhattan.
Yes, we've talked a lot about that lately. Are you focused on the Wagner Group?
Yes,
and
Senator.
What they're doing?
Absolutely.
Okay, because you continue to hear about they're trying to branch out. Mm-hmm. And of course, the abuse they're carrying out there, I think we want to know about that. Do you feel that the Biden family engagement with China has compromised the position that this administration is able to take against China to really hold them to account?
Senator, this administration, this Justice Department is giving no quarter to China's malicious activities. We have brought cases against malicious cyber activities, including members of the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, perpetrating aggressive acts in the cyber realm, those who are perpetrating human rights abuses.
Let me ask you about Ukrainian children. I'm from Tennessee, and we have several churches in the Nashville area, my church being one of them, that have ministries in Ukraine. And I have a good friend who has a program for orphans there in Ukraine. And of course, we've heard just horrific stories about the Russians kidnapping children and taking them to re-education camps in Russia. Senator Peters and I introduced a resolution, actually reintroduced it, condemning this action. And I know that others are looking at this. So would you classify what they're doing to these children a war of genocide, the things that are being carried out against not only the Ukrainian people, but also specifically against the children? How do you classify that?
Senator, I think the Russians and the Russian war machine is perpetrating war crimes, crimes of aggression, crimes against humanity, specifically when it comes to children. Genocide, Senator, requires a specific intent. I'm going to be a little lawyerly with you, I'm sorry. But to
I think
show
this
that
is a pretty specific intent. When you look at what they are doing and you look at the human rights abuses, and I do think it needs our attention.
If I may, Senator, I quite agree with you. We should leave, and we will leave, nothing on the table. We've got a genocide statute. If we develop competent evidence to be able to pursue that, we certainly should do it.
Are you putting the same attention to the kids that are being trafficked at the southern border?
Senator, we are putting our resources also on human trafficking, as I talked with Senator Hirono about. Indeed, we established a task force specifically about the human trafficking and smuggling.
Well, my time has expired, and I have to tell you, people are getting so tired. They're exhausted, and just their hearts break for what they see on news reports and footage, whether it is coming at the southern border, whether it's what is happening in Ukraine, whether it's the stories about these re-education camps and the way these children are being treated. And the fact that it is just something up for discussion is really disappointing. We need action.
I agree, Senator. I hope you'll support our request for a Crimes Against Humanity statute, which would allow us to bring accountability for exactly the types of crimes you're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Deputy Monaco, for being here, and thanks for your service. In early March, we had Attorney General Garland before this committee, and I asked him a series of questions about 18 U.S.C. Section 1507, and specifically why no arrests have been made at the homes of Supreme Court justices in violation of that statute, which prohibits people from protesting or demonstrating outside the home of a Supreme Court justice or a judge or a juror or other officer of the court with intent to influence any court proceeding. His answer was succinct, but amounted to the effect that the marshals are on the ground, and the marshals have full authority to arrest under any federal statute, including Section 1507. About 3 weeks later, my friend and colleague from Alabama, Senator Katie Britt, before another committee, asked Attorney General Garland about a slide deck that she had discovered that was being used to train the U.S. Marshals who were performing their protective detail duty at the homes of Supreme Court justices. These slides seemed to contradict what Attorney General Garland had told me 3 weeks earlier. They contradicted in several respects. First of all, the slide number 4 says that in order to make an arrest there, they really need to be looking at something that demonstrates, quote, the intent of influencing any judge language, thus logically goes to criminal threats and intimidation, not First Amendment protest activities. Now, I personally, as I've poured through that statute, I don't see that as an element of the offense. It's not an element of the offense. There's nothing in there that requires it to have this separate, non-specified element within 1507 about the intent being something amounting to criminal threats and intimidation. That's not in there. Just as troubling, maybe even more so, is slide number 5, cited by Senator Britt at that same hearing, where it says that, quote, any contemplated U.S. Marshal Service enforcement action under 1507 should be coordinated in advance with the appropriate U.S. Attorney's Office. And as if that were not enough to discourage the marshals from making arrests under Section 1507 in this circumstance, it goes on to say that it is counterproductive to make probable cause arrests on cases that the U.S. Attorney's Office will not charge and prosecute. So I've been wondering, how exactly is it considered to be the full authority to arrest people under Section 1507, as the Attorney General has described, if you have to get pre-clearance first to do it, and if you're adding an additional element, one not found in the United States Code?
Well, Senator, I know the Attorney General has spoken quite directly to this about the direction that he has given and has repeatedly given to the Marshal Service, and the Marshal Service Director.
When he was asked about these slides, by the way, he was not aware of them. Were you aware of them? Were you aware of them before they were given to the Marshal Service to train marshals on how to protect the homes of Supreme Court justices?
No, Senator, but I also know that the Marshal Service Director has been very clear that he is will regularly review the training provided to the Deputy U.S. Marshals, who continue to this day to provide 24/7 protection for the justices, their homes, their property, at the unprecedented direction of Attorney General Garland last year. This has never happened before in the history of the department.
I understand that, but I'm asking about the enforcement of Section 1507. Now, you're the Deputy Attorney General. Under the organizational chart of the Department of Justice, you have supervisory authority, oversight over the U.S. Marshal Service. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so you're saying you had not seen these slides before the marshals were trained on it?
That's
I assume you've reviewed them since then?
I've seen the slides that you referenced that Senator Britt showed to the Attorney General.
And have you discussed them with Attorney General Garland?
I have not, Senator, but I would like to make very clear the direction the Attorney General gave to the Director of the U.S. Marshal Service, who himself has indicated that he has been told repeatedly by the Attorney General that he has full authority to enforce all federal laws, including 1507, as long as he's prioritizing, and the Deputy U.S. Marshals are prioritizing, the life, the safety, the protection of the property of the justices, which is...
Under any of the other federal statutes under which they're authorized to make an arrest on the ground, have they added an additional non-statutory element to the offense, or have they required pre-clearance with the U.S. Attorney's Office prior to making a probable cause arrest?
Well, Senator, without necessarily adopting your interpretation of the slides, the Director of the Marshal Service has been very clear. He's going to regularly review that training. He's got all the authority repeatedly given to him and directed by the Attorney General to enforce federal law. His priority, however, and that of the Deputy U.S. Marshals who are providing that security and that protection, is for the property, the life, the safety of the justices and their families.
And yet, since this slide was revealed to the public, he hasn't either corrected his statement or gone back to the Marshal Service and asked that the additional non-statutory element be removed, or asked that the pre-clearance from the U.S. Attorney's Office be approved prior to the making of a probable cause arrest under Section 1507.
The statement by the Attorney General was very clear and not in need of correction. He was very clear about the direction that he is given to the Marshal Service.
He had no idea what direction had been given to the Marshal Service. No idea whatsoever. So we can say a lot of things about it. It was not clear, and he hasn't cleared it up, and it's rather inconsistent with what he told us in front of this committee.
Respectfully, Senator, the Attorney General was clear. His direction to the Marshal Service, to the Marshal Service Director, was to prioritize the life, safety, and protection of the property of the justices, to have the full authority to enforce any federal law.
With
but to
pre-clearance and with additional elements not found in the statute.
Respectfully, Senator, that was not the Attorney General's testimony. That was not his statement, his direction to the
Well, he wasn't aware of it.
director.
It couldn't be in his statement. He didn't know about it. Not when he talked to me, not when he talked to my colleague, Katie Britt. I see my time's expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.